This has been an incredibly challenging year. I empathize with executive leaders, and social justice is on many leaders' minds. Leaders are no longer content sitting comfortably by the sidelines and are wondering how to take the next steps in diversity, inclusion, and equity. I want to share an approach with you today that is most likely to create sustainable change, one where your company will be best positioned to make an impact on social justice and any diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts you desire for your company. And the great thing is that you can do this as a startup or a large company. I want to illustrate this with a story. Early in my career, I had the opportunity to build a brand new team. This team was going to film, produce, and edit more video than the company had ever done in its 20-year history. And we had to accomplish this within 1 year with a new team who had never worked together before. My background was in law, not in video production. I had to reach beyond my immediate network to find great talent. Fast forward a year, my team had exceeded our production goals. This brand new team also happened to be diverse in roles, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, skills, education, and religion. And I mostly hired from within Utah. We represented the most diverse team in the company, but I didn't set out to hire for diversity. Diversity happened organically because I focused on identifying skills and potential to achieve our ambitious business goals. Most leaders really want this more organic version of finding talent that will add to diversity on their teams. And believe me, as a minority in most of the teams that I've worked on, this is my preferred approach as well. I often have the opportunity to speak with students. One high school student said something unforgettable. "Hire me for my skills, not my skin." Everyone wants to be hired for their skills and potential, not because they tick a box in a diversity category. We also want to work in spaces where we're appreciated for the wide range of insights and contributions our life experiences have taught us. There is a renewed call for empathy for team members who face the realities of social injustice outside of the workplace. Our workplaces should be spaces where everyone is valued. Oftentimes, we think hiring for diversity is the holy grail. And in this case, hiring a diverse team was actually the easy part. The hard part was learning how to effectively manage this diverse team. It was one of the most difficult leadership roles I've had in my career. There was a lot of figuring things out, and we got used to each other's personalities and different ways of thinking. My team didn't just agree to everything I said, and I didn't want them to. There were a lot of conflicts and wrestling through team dynamics and delivery deadlines. I was used to being an authority figure as a partner in a law firm, and I had to figure out how to facilitate team-based decisions. I'm grateful that people gave me the space to learn. My favorite part was the experience of seeing my team's talents surface. I learned that video editors love to work in dark rooms. I learned to appreciate the pride that content writers and editors took in the excellence of their work. Team dynamics coalesced through late night visits at Waffle House when we went on location with our production crew. By the end of that year, I had undergone a leadership transformation, and to be honest, it was really hard. I use this story to illustrate a critical aspect of inclusion that is missing from most DEI conversations. Leadership transformation is required for DEI work to have the most impact. When I do executive trainings, the number one thing that leaders want for their DEI efforts is to be authentic. What they usually mean by this is they want to do DEI for the right reason, not to check a box. I believe authenticity and leadership transformation go hand in hand. For those wondering what I mean about inclusive leadership transformation, here are some examples of behavioral change that inclusive leaders experience. Reflecting on your beliefs on inclusion. Understanding how your leadership style limits inclusion. accessing the great ideas of your team members, expanding your personal trust network, nurturing different leaders and leadership styles, increasing team performance and business outcomes. Notice how these behaviors are very focused on our own leadership and team interactions. This change should show up at the leadership level. And today I want to talk about why this doesn't happen. Sir Ken Robinson gave a seminal TED Talk that's been viewed over 70 million times since 2006. He shares how our system of education is killing creativity in children. He says, "Children have become frightened of being wrong, and we run our companies like this. We stigmatize mistakes, and we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst things you can make. And the result is that we're educating people out of their creative capacities." The biggest thing that will hold leaders back from accomplishing our desired DEI goals is ourselves. With the heightened focus on social issues, a lot of leaders are hesitant to tackle diversity and inclusion. As Sir Robinson observes, people don't want to get it wrong. Even worse than making a mistake, people don't want to be seen as a bad person. The personal nature of DEI strikes at our core identity. We worry about being judged if we don't agree with someone. This is ironic, since diverse ideas are at the heart of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So we need psychological safety in order to take this journey toward inclusive leadership. In my work with leaders, we envision inclusion as a journey of discovery of ourselves, our teams, and the people around us. It's a journey to understand our own view of the world, understand others' views, and collaborate through those differences, not in spite of them. Through this journey, we learn to value diversity, not ignore it. It is impossible to become an equitable leader without going through a mindset transformation because equity solutions require more time and resources. Equity requires empathy and courage to face the resistance you will experience from others. You'll need conviction to bring your team along on the reasons for change. DEI learning is best done in a non-judgmental space. These topics can be sensitive, potentially divisive, and let's be real, mistakes will happen. The world has enough critics already. In our workplaces, let's try to remove the stigma of leaders who, when trying to apply inclusive leadership, sometimes misstep as they try to do better. I know for those who are hurting, change cannot happen fast enough. For those who are underrepresented in their companies, it's understandable that your patience may be wearing thin from years of feeling minimized, marginalized, and unheard. And hearing me say, "Don't be too quick to criticize a leader," may be difficult to hear. I know that we all have barriers to break down. When I'm working with leaders, I'm teaching them that within their organizations, everyone needs a non-judgmental space to learn and grow together side by side. When we do this together, leaders are less likely to retreat from the DEI conversation, and employees are less likely to feel disenfranchised. A learning culture also drives more collaboration, creativity, and innovation across the organization. Some people might think that we need to push leaders harder on DEI. Think back to a time when you have been pushed into doing something. You probably felt resistance, right? Leaders are feeling pushed from many external sources, which often leads to reactive decision-making and feeling guarded, rather than open to learning. This isn't great for anyone. Being pushed is not the same thing as being challenged. I'm fortunate to work with many leaders who have embraced the challenge of creating more inclusion in their companies. These leaders know that the future is here now. They want to be a catalyst for change and actively embrace their role in modeling inclusive leadership. They are learning to share their commitment to DEI authentically. While they recognize that DEI makes their company more competitive, They also know that this is a multi-year journey, not a competition. Their success will be based on their own personal conviction. And for those future leaders watching this, inclusive leadership is a highly marketable skill. A recent study showed that leaders who understand diversity, inclusion, and allyship are 62% more likely to become a C-suite leader. DEI is becoming a core leadership competency for any startup leader, large company, or global leader. A learning culture also provides space for curiosity. Think about how young children learn. Children don't say everything perfectly, and they aren't afraid to ask questions or tell you how they feel. Curiosity allows for vulnerability, where leaders can be more real about their concerns. Here are some examples of how leaders show their curiosity. In an executive coaching session, an executive said, "How can we have this conversation without women and people of color in the room?" This is understandable because of traditional approaches of DEI being meant for women and people of color. I asked the leader in return, what do you think could be learned by reflecting on your own personal journey and identity? Learning how to relate to others requires reflecting on ourselves first. And no matter who you are, this can be incredibly uncomfortable. In another session, someone said, "The only time I feel like a minority is when I'm in a conversation about DEI." I appreciated that this executive felt vulnerable enough to share their discomfort. While it feels very logical to say that inclusion also includes those in the majority, there can be very real emotions when those in the majority get more proximate to this work. Why is DEI so political? This is another sentiment that is often expressed due to news, media, and workplace conversations that can feel divisive. Past experiences can cause reactive emotions. One of the biggest compliments I received was from a leader who was worried that my session was going to be political. Their biggest takeaway from the training session was practical answers to questions, acknowledgement of certain cultural realities without getting political. I love to show leaders that we can learn to be inclusive without generating high levels of defensiveness. In each of these cases, the leader was willing to show up and work through discomfort. Notice when we don't allow for a learning culture, a team member could be critical of their leader for expressing these concerns. I welcome these expressions as completely normal to the learning process. And when we get rid of the expectation of perfection and other things that hold back learning, we can start to unpack the nuances of what tokenism really looks like, aspects of microaggressions, and how to widen the range of talent in your company. And as you build your knowledge, you're ready to understand equity. Your social justice efforts will have more impact. Some of you may be wondering, what about formal programs we've been working on so hard on in our company? Many of our companies are making huge financial investments in DEI programs and initiatives. Boston Consulting Group did a study in 2019 that found 97% of workers say their company has a diversity program, but only 25% say they're benefiting from it. So for those 25%, I say keep those programs going, but also recognize that many traditional forms of DEI don't reach leadership levels. Let's look at more data to illustrate. We've seen a dramatic increase in hiring DEI professionals due to growing awareness of social injustice. The hiring of chief diversity officers for S&P 500 companies has increased to 53% in 2021. Even with a majority of top companies having chief diversity officers, the percentage of women CEOs in the Fortune 500 is still less than 8%. The percentage of people of color who are CEOs is less than 8%. So there's clearly a gap at the leadership level, even with companies who have chief diversity officers. As DEI roles become more common, let's get ahead of a huge hurdle that companies are facing. An effective DEI practitioner blends business strategy, operations, and employee experience. Most companies seem to prefer to hire a person of color for the role. However, let's be clear. It's not the person's ethnicity that makes them right for the job. It's their leadership and strategy abilities. It can be incredibly challenging for a head of DEI to navigate the newness of this role in a company. Make sure that this leader has budget for training and consultant support, just like any other strategic role in your company. Leadership transformation can and probably should happen before you hire a DEI leader. For those companies that aren't ready for a DEI leader, for example, startups, you can actually be working on leadership transformation anytime in your company growth. And remember that when you hire a DEI leader, the leadership team should stay engaged and continue to work toward leadership behavioral change at the top. Board leadership is another area where we see a massive gap. The good news is that the percentage of women in Fortune 500 board seats has increased to 37% in 2021. But people of color are still highly underrepresented. Black people hold only 9% of board seats. Latinos and Latinas, our nation's highest ethnic population, hold 4% of board seats. And Asians hold less than 4% of board seats. So much for the Asian minority myth, right? And when you intersect both gender and race, white women hold over 20% of corporate board seats now. Compare this to Asian women and Latina women, who hold only about 1% of board seats each. And these are companies with world-class D&I infrastructure and support. So let's be clear that leadership transformation is not always happening, even with large investments in programs. So why is this leadership transformation so important? Think of this as rushing to frame your walls and laying your roof, but forgetting to pour a solid foundation for your house. The foundation is leadership transformation, where leaders are core to this work, not passive observers. The foundation also includes DEI integrated into our business efforts. This is the most impactful DEI best practice. When the entire leadership team is aligned, you build a stronger foundation. Most companies, by the way, start framing walls and laying roof without realizing the foundation part. It's because we see the walls and roof of other companies and think it's a best practice. So this is not a criticism if you thought this was the best approach. Many leaders just don't know, and I love sharing with leaders a more sustainable approach. So when a client comes to me feeling a bit sheepish that they have just started their work on DEI, I tell them it's actually great timing. I ask them, are you willing to build the foundation first? If you're a CEO, here's how you know that your leadership team is ready to take this journey. There is high trust on your team to discuss sensitive topics. There is mutual desire to work toward organizational inclusion. There is willingness to build leadership resilience. A leadership team benefits from having the same common language of what diversity, inclusion, and equity mean to the company. This creates greater consistency in the leadership behaviors that are expected from leaders at the top. This transformative leadership approach is important for 3 reasons. First, CEOs and their executive teams have the power to change company culture. Second, leaders who authentically practice inclusive leadership gain higher performance on their teams. High performance is what leaders are actually hired to deliver. And third, the days of keeping environments and societal events completely separate are gone. Employees and the world have a different expectation for the roles that companies play in their communities. Transformation takes time, and if 2020 has taught us anything, it is that people can learn and adapt. The events of this past year may have created divisions in your company. Bringing people together through learning and discovery can help heal and unify difficult relationships. I believe we will see more and more leaders rise to the challenge of inclusive leadership. With every leader willing to do this work, we get much closer to the vision shared by Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization.